Hey there, thanks for tuning into Duckbricks. I'm Chris, and today we're jumping into a highly anticipated review of the newest LEGO Ninjago City set, Ninjago City Workshops. Now, I wish I was recording when I unboxed this set, because my response to seeing the incredible minifigures, including some fan favorites that we've been asking for years, was insane. Now, there were a lot of wild rumors surrounding this set. For a while, we all thought it was going to be a Crossroads set, and while it does share some similarities, it is absolutely part of the Ninjago City modular buildings, which are among my favorite LEGO sets ever. Now join me as we dive into an in-depth look at all the minifigures, the interior designs, and everything that you can do with the mech customization feature that comes with this modular for the very first time. It's a really interesting set. I'm sure it's going to be fairly divisive in the community, having mostly a playset featured around building up the mech, but the mechanisms they include to make that happen are so cool. And this is easily one of my favorite Ninjago City modulars just because of how unique it is. I will also be doing a separate video on how I'm integrating this into my LEGO City. At the time of filming this video, I have no idea how I'm going to manage to fit it in, and I'll also be doing a video on every single Easter egg and reference that you can find inside this set, so stay tuned for those, and be sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more, but let's jump into the review right now. Okay, so this is 71837 Ninjago City Workshops. It contains 3,244 pieces and retails for $250 and is a bit of a surprise entry into the Ninjago City modular building series, which is quite surprising to a lot of people because we at first thought this was going to be unrelated to the modulars and would be more focused on the Crossroads. And while many characters in the set are from Dragon's Rising Season 1, featured prominently through the Crossroads, this is absolutely a full-on Ninjago City set, giving us some characters that we have been asking for years. I believe this set contains maybe the most asked for minifigure ever out of the current minifigures that we've been waiting for LEGO to produce, and that is of course Casual Harumi, who played a major role in Ninjago Season 8, but we never actually got her in that particular outfit, and I'll be taking a much closer look at all of the minifigures at the end of this review, so stay tuned for that. But there's a lot to see here. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I'll be doing a separate video showcasing every single Easter egg and reference, so while I'll maybe be calling out a couple of them here and there, the primary focus of this video is just to showcase what you can see and do with the set itself. And I imagine this might be a pretty controversial one. You see, unlike many of the other Ninjago City sets, the entire focus of this build is centered around a gigantic play feature, and that is being able to fully armor up a mech standing in the middle. It also does something completely differently than the other Ninjago City sets, opting to instead have you have the ability to remove the interiors of each building as separate walls, as we just showcased, instead of having the layers actually stack and be removable, much like many of the other LEGO modular buildings, which is actually a major improvement, and I really like that they did that, because now it doesn't have a lot of these stability issues that something like Ninjago City Gardens did suffer from. Now altogether, the set features a ton of buildings, most of which are unique to the set and haven't really appeared in the show. I guess maybe Dorama's circus tent display is sort of something that appeared in the Crossroads, but it's so different than its actual appearance in the show that it may as well have just been a completely separate building. But of course, the entire focus of the set is dedicated around a brand new mech frame that they have introduced, with a really cool function to position the mech itself. We'll be taking a look first at the functionality of this build because of course that is really the main focus point of the set. Now, I said at the beginning of the review that this is probably going to be a controversial set, and that's because a lot of people tend to buy the Ninjago City sets for display in their cities, not really for play, but this is absolutely a play-focused set. It's a good thing though that in my opinion the play functions are really fun. There's a lot of really cool things that you can do with this, and I definitely want to showcase all of them on video because I feel like they don't really come across very well on the box art because they're just so kinetic in what you can do. The platform here is really interestingly built, using one of the newer LEGO City worm gear elements to move it back and forth, with a separate layer to have the stairs retract into the platform. You have a number of different cranes on the side of the building that can be unfurled inwards and outwards to transport some of the boxes in and out, and a larger crane at the top here, which actually is a really unique aspect to the city, which really makes it feel unique compared to the other Ninjago City sets and have its own place in the skyline. The functionality of this top crane is really controlled by a number of separate knobs. Twisting a knob on the side of the building spins it back and forth, a knob on the side of the crane allows you to raise and lower the winch, and then twisting the dark gray cylinder on the side of it allows you to reposition it either higher or lower. It's a very simple set of mechanisms, but one that really works well, especially because you're not just manually moving it back and forth, which probably would have been fine, but it's just a lot more fun to be able to control the movement, especially the 360-degree rotation with gears. Another really cool function is this opening garage door, utilizing the quarter gear elements introduced in LEGO Technic to actually have the vintage style of LEGO garage door opener pieces be attached in a curved mechanism, which is the only time they've ever done that in a LEGO set. I did not know that was even possible to do, and it's just so clever. Removing the mech though, I do want to dive into some of the details of the actual build. Setting the mech aside does unfortunately have the side effect of making the build feel a little bit empty, and that's definitely by design. The entire point of the build is essentially a set of scaffolding around building the mech, and it reminds me of the Samurai X Cave Chaos set that we got for Day of the Departed back in 2016, and the fact that a lot of the set is built around this platform where you can create a vehicle. Altogether, with the mech removed, I definitely do feel like while it still looks good, it does feel a little empty with so many layers being dedicated to just being able to stack up pieces onto the mech. Unlike many of the other Ninjago City sets, which contain a ton of different buildings, this is a bit of a smaller offering. And despite having over 3,000 pieces, a lot of it is empty space, which is by design. It has to be in order to allow you to move the mech back and forth. With the mech removed though, it allows me to showcase a better look at the way this function works, and it just is such a satisfying mechanism to twist it back and forth and have the stairs and loading platform move back and forth as you push it onto the docking bay. It's a very, very minor detail, and it's not something that is very easily noticeable, but it's something that I feel adds so much playability and realism to the way this works. But now, let's go ahead all around the model and see where we can find all the individual pieces for the mech. You'll see scattered throughout the design are a number of different buckets, which all contain individual elements which you can use to upgrade the mech form. One really cool thing about the mech, and we'll spend a lot of time talking about just that build, is it's clearly meant to be a brand new template for mech design for Ninjago, and I would love to see other people create their own versions of the ninja mechs in this style. They literally provide extra stickers in case you want to make your own. Now, I personally was going to make my own versions of the mech for like all the Ninja and Aaron and Sora because I thought that would be a really cool thing to do, but then I realized that Bricks My Mind is just going to do it anyway, and I'm sure his are going to look pretty much the best form that you could want, so I will leave it to my friend Sean to do that. I'm sure he is going to absolutely cook, and you better believe I already texted him and said I expect him to see videos on mechs for all of the Ninja out very soon, so go to his channel to check those out, and if they're not out already, then he is slacking. Moving onwards though, let's take a look at the functionality here. The primary middle section of the crane is meant to raise and lower these crates which contain additional armor elements for the mech. Not all of it fully works out because the top crane doesn't actually have the functionality to go all the way to the bottom, but you can use your imagination and really pretend here. Obviously you have a winch mounted via a standard Lego chain, and I just do really find it very satisfying to be able to move that bit of the crane back and forth. As you twist the gear on the top crane here, even if you lower it down to the very bottom, it doesn't have enough string to reach the very bottom of the platform, so that's a bit unfortunate. You can get close, but not to the bottom, so again, you kind of have to use your imagination, or you can pretend that the middle crane is meant to pick stuff up from the bottom, and then this taller crane can pick stuff up halfway through, which I guess is a completely valid way to play with the set. Of course, the entire focus of Ninjago City Workshops is to build up this frame of a mech, and it's a really interesting frame to play with. We'll take a separate look at the mech by itself in a second, but first, let's showcase all the individual armor pieces and where you can find them throughout the set. On the back of the set here, we actually have some individual white tiles, which we'll later use for the upper legs. We have a number of flame yellowish-orange armor pieces in the main hangar bay, and opening up the workshop area showcases one of the other shoulder armors, and even an opening drawer which contains the final piece we need. I actually really like how all the pieces are scattered throughout the set because it really feels like you're piecing it together from different scrap materials, and this is an overview of all the individual components you have to add onto it. It's fairly bare bones because obviously the entire point of the mech is for you to take the frame and to build your own creations, but I appreciate how this gives a bit of a look into what sorts of different armor attachments you might be able to use to add onto the mech. Taking the build by itself, let's go ahead and attach each piece. We'll take the shoulder armor and place it up at the front. We have a central cockpit piece with an actual sticker showcasing the ninja team. Two side armor pieces for the lower arms. We have the standard SCCBS upper leg elements for the knees there. We have a couple of teal ingots for the lower legs, and then finally we attach some of these white armor pieces up to the upper legs themselves. Lastly, there's some skirt elements for the armor pieces, and then the mech is complete. The mech itself is, I guess, technically supposed to be a mech for Twitchy Tim, at least that's how it appears in the set images, but to me it's more of a generic mech with a pretty standard color scheme of the teal, white, and flame yellowish orange, which is just meant to show one configuration of what you can do with this particular mech frame. Obviously, a lot of the mech frame itself is dark gray, and I'm sure if you were to build this same style of mech for the other ninja, you'd probably want to change out some of the pieces to at least make it feel a bit more colorful. As it is right now, this reminds me a lot of the early Bionicle Metru frame skeletons, or even a Toa Inika skeleton where you have pretty much the same color underneath the armor, and you're just layering armor pieces onto the mech. It's a really interesting build, and it reminds me of something that LEGO would do for Exoforce, just with a lot more attention to detail and maybe a little bit more restriction in when it comes to articulation, which we'll take a look at in a second. Altogether, fully armored up, I actually really do like the color scheme here. I think that maybe there's a little too much dark gray, but for what it is, I think it gets the job done. And obviously, it's meant to showcase that you have the inner skeleton of the mech to play with itself. It's really fun to get this into different poses, and I think my big problem here when it comes to posability is the way the legs themselves are mounted to the waist. Because of the actual building techniques used, you can really only bend the upper legs forwards and backwards. You can splay them very slightly to the side, but not to any meaningful amount, and that does restrict you when it comes to articulation. That being said though, because the articulation is restricted on the upper legs, it is a lot more stable than a standard LEGO Exoforce mech would have been, and I appreciate how this does have full-on articulation when it comes to the knees and the ankle joints, which is something we haven't really seen out of mechs this size in a while. Altogether, you can get this in a lot of fun and interesting poses, as you can see here, and I would even argue that with all the armor removed, you can get it into even more different poses, but it's a really interesting frame, and I'd love to see LEGO release different sets using this frame for some of the other characters. I don't know if they only were able to get away with some of the building techniques here because the age range for the set is a little bit higher than your standard Ninjago set. Ninjago City Workshops is a 14+ age range build, as opposed to the standard 8 or 9 or even 10+ sets for the rest of the portfolio, so obviously they are gearing it towards older kids, which is why they're allowed to use a little bit more building techniques when it comes to the articulation here, but I still definitely feel that it could have been improved. As you can see, playing around with it in hand showcases the limitations of a build like this, not allowing you to splay the legs outwards. The waist articulation is nice, and I do like how you can open up the cockpit, although I definitely would have been wanting to see some recolors for those Technic elements used for the upper frame for the cockpit, because I feel like it just is a little bit uninteresting being just dark gray. Altogether, here's what a minifigure looks like inside of it, and this absolutely has the Exoforce vibes that a lot of the LEGO Ninjago mechs have been sort of hitting in recent history. It's cool to see so much articulation here, but again, definitely could be improved on. But my hands down favorite thing about the mech is actually the additional sticker sheet included with the set. There's a generic symbol in the Ninjago language up at the center of the mech here, but if you take the sticker sheet included for the set, there are a number of different additional symbols which you can use to theme this around all of the ninja. Kai, Jay, Zane, Cole, Lloyd, and Nia, as well as Aaron and Sora. Which really excited me because as somebody who loves customizing LEGO builds and obviously wants to see the same style of build for each of the main characters, they've literally given you the stickers to be able to make it a reality. I love that they did this, and I'm very curious to see other people take this mech frame and do their own things with it. It's by no means perfect, but for a standard average scale build that is compliant with all of LEGO's design rules and restrictions, it works really nicely. And this is a really interesting set because it's one of the only times in history that I can remember LEGO basically just saying, hey, here's a mech frame that you can use to customize yourselves and just go crazy with it. The entire set is built off of that idea. And the thing I find really interesting is that this is one of the most explicit lean-ins to Gundam that LEGO's ever actually delved into, with an actual store in the city workshops being a bit of like a mech model workshop store, which very clearly is a reference to other types of building toys, and this is their attempt at being able to replicate that same exact play pattern with standard LEGO pieces. It's a completely new function, and I think it is really cool that LEGO is trying to do something more unique like this, and I say bring it on. I'd love to see more mechs in this style, and I'd love to see LEGO introduce more types of mech frames to play around with. And of course, taking a look at the frame itself with all of the armor removed, it's slightly more articulatable, but pretty much you can get it in the same poses. You can clearly see that the way the upper legs are attached is unlike any other LEGO mech, and I definitely do feel that it's a lot more stable because of that, but again, you can't really splay the legs outwards side to side because of the restriction in the way they've mounted the pieces. It's certainly one of the most unique frames ever, and it definitely feels like something an AFOL would come up with as opposed to an actual LEGO designer, which is absolutely both a pro and a con in my opinion. It's just not something that LEGO's ever done as a standard set. But with that, I think we can move on from the mech, which admittedly is a pretty big focus of the city build despite being the final thing you build, and move on to the actual city. Placing the mech back in the stand with all of the armor removed, you can see that it really completes the entire workshop area itself, where you can see the buildings basically are built to go all around it. And now let's place the armor pieces back where we found them. Despite the fact that there are so many pieces to spread out throughout the set, it's fairly simple to put everything back where it belongs, and I appreciate how they're kind of scattered throughout different levels because it really adds on to the story of the set, where imagine if you put yourself in the shoes of a minifigure, you're hunting around the city trying to find pieces of metal and armor to add onto your mech. It's just a really fun play pattern, and it's something unlike any other Ninjago City set has done. But now let's take a look at the individual buildings. At the bottom here we have a workshop area, which I guess is meant to be used by Pixel or anybody else who's working on the mech. Again, it has that really interesting quarter gear element to be able to open up the garage door in a curved piece, and I just love the parts usage throughout the set, like the catapults making up the roof. You have some upside down pieces mounted for the lanterns, a reference to the other city sets there, and even the usage of a relatively newer piece that was introduced in January of last year for LEGO City to actually mount pieces on a metallic grate. Moving on to the inside of the workshop, you'll notice that every single one of the buildings in this set has an open window element which allows you to stick your finger in and remove them, which I think honestly aesthetically is not the best, but given that these sides of the walls are probably going to be covered up anyways, it's not that big of a deal. Here's a look at the internal workings of the mechanism to open and close the curved garage door, just so clever and a very smart design to use those gear elements, and something I never would have thought of or even realized the pieces could work that way. The workshop itself is pretty bare bones. Essentially, it just houses the armor element and really nothing else, and I probably would have loved to see just a little bit more going on inside the workshop other than just an empty space to hold the armor, but I understand the entire point of that part of the workshop is just to house the pieces, so I can give it a bit of a pass there. The final building on the bottom layer is a small noodle shop, and it's actually only really using half of the building. I love this technique for the actual grates in which you can place your order, much like an actual Japanese ramen shop, and if you go onto the other side of it, you'll notice they have their different specials displayed as stickers. There's a whole kitchen area, and they're doing a lot with this compact space, as opposed to the larger space for the other workshop, which is primarily just an open area that houses the mech piece. That space optimizes every single stud to great effect, which I really appreciate. Moving on to the next level here, basically 2 full levels of a standard city are used to have this giant mech housing crane platform, and immediately I can imagine this is probably going to be one of the more controversial aspects of the set. I will say that this part of the set feels the most underdeveloped in the way that it's built up. It has a lot of empty and hollow space, and that's not something we're used to seeing in any Ninjago modular set, which typically packs things to the brim with all sorts of detail. But I do understand that, again, this entire thing is built around the functionality of the crane, so you kind of have to shift your mindset there. But I do love this little noodle sign using an upside down minifigure scarf element and magic wands as the chopsticks. That's just super clever. Moving on to the next level here for the other side of the buildings, we have another building right here which you can open up, and this is an interesting one. It's supposed to be Zane's apartment, although obviously it's not really something that we've seen in the show. It has a micro-build version of his jet from Crystallize, which is pretty cool to see, as well as a micro-build version of his Ninjago movie ice tank, which I'm guessing that's what it is because you have the black treads as well as a triangular shape. And then we have one of my favorite stickers in the set showcasing Dr. Julian in minifigure form, who we still have not gotten as a physical minifigure since his appearance in 2012. Now, when we asked the designer of this set if we're ever going to get him as a physical minifigure, his only response to us was that he's dead, so it doesn't make sense. So does that mean that maybe is this sticker a tease towards the fact that we might be getting him as a minifigure in the future, or is it just a reference that we'll never get him as a minifigure and this is the closest we're ever going to get in physical form? You can decide. As we move up to the top floor here, we have a nice reference to the classic LEGO Ninja theme, which I'm kind of surprised we haven't seen referenced before in a Ninjago City set, and the first building here is Dorama's Magic Show. There's a lot of really cool references and Easter eggs packed into this particular part of the building, and we'll be diving into that in a separate video, but I just do want to call out a nice callback to LEGO Castle with Magisto the Magic Wizard, the Duplo rabbit being pulled out of a hat, and even trading cards featuring Nia in her original 2011 pilot's appearance, as well as a couple of Skulkin and the original ninja designs for Kai and Cole for the animal symbols they used to wear. The magic shop itself has all sorts of different pieces like a record player, and even some curtains which mimic the sinister magic act that Dorama was able to perform in Season 1 of Dragon's Rising. Since he is a recurring character, I'm actually really happy we're getting him as a minifigure because it seems like we're gonna keep getting him and his mannequin in future sets. But by far my favorite building out of all of the workshops is the mech store over here. The side of the building features a poster which showcases the Upply, another trio of characters we still have not gotten in physical form, who appeared in Season 13, Master of the Mountain, back in 2020. But the really cool thing here is that this is absolutely meant to be a Gundam style of store, but of course, showcasing all of the previous Ninjago Titan mechs. We have Lloyd's, Cole's, Jay's, and Zane's on a row here, with an empty gap which maybe suggests we'll be getting another one soon, plus Nia's original Samurai X mech up at the top, different colors of pods there are prices for each of the individual mechs, there's a microscale build of the incredible Cole's Titan mech, which was my favorite set of 2023, and then at the bottom there we have a really intriguing Easter egg, which might be the rumored Kai's Fire Knight mech, which is something that is coming out later this summer. It's really hard to tell what that's supposed to be, and obviously the art style there is so simplistic, it almost reminds me of the Bionicle G2 or Modanui online game G1 style art, which we saw back for Bionicle, but again, that could be a hint of a future product, which is super cool. The glass window there is a sticker showcasing the Titan mech, and honestly, putting that sticker on was not very fun, especially because I was having to pay a lot of attention to not getting my fingerprints on the sticker, but the end result looks really nice, and I'm very glad they were able to factor that in. Here's the knob on the back of the store, which showcases the ability to turn the crane at the top of the store itself, and I think it's just such a really cool concept for one of the buildings here to be focused on an actual store. Altogether, throughout the set, there are all sorts of fun and unique building techniques, such as chairs being laid on their sides to actually act as the roof of the building. We have all sorts of really nice pieces, even on the inside of the crane here, which is built up really nicely, little references scattered throughout the set. The attention to detail is phenomenal, and I just love the parts usage of so many of these unique elements, like the upside down catapult pieces I mentioned earlier, which I never would have thought of using as a roof element, but works super well here. And we even had our introduction to, at least to me, a brand new element. This looked like it could be something like the base of a ramp, or it could be used for some sort of other Asian building, but it was a really interesting curved piece which tapers off near the bottom. It's a 2x6 element, super interesting, and one that was absolutely new to me. But with that, we can now give my final thoughts on the set as a whole. But of course, we have to talk about the minifigure selection first. The minifigures in the set range from really good to honestly not that good, and it's a really interesting mix of figures. On the one hand, we are finally getting characters like Twitchy Tim, Dorama, Dr. Laro, and of course Harumi in her casual outfit in Lego form, Harumi in particular being maybe like the #1 most requested minifigure ever. But then on the other hand, the civilians in this set are probably some of the most uninteresting we've ever gotten for a city build. In fact, they feel almost like they could have been just regular Lego City minifigures. There's nothing special about them, no new prints, no new leg printing or anything like that. They're literally just generic city minifigures, and that is a bit of a letdown. Before we move on to the figures though, I do want to call out something very interesting with the base set. You see, there are Technic exposed holes on the side of the walkways here, which leads me to believe that maybe they could be doing some sort of a smaller expansion. I could see them doing like a Ninjago City docks area where you could literally just make a small dock build and then have it act as an extension to the city sets. Obviously, we did get a Ninjago City docks modular back in 2018, but it's really interesting how there is only one Technic hole on the outside here, and it clearly is meant to connect to something in the future, so I guess we can only speculate as to what that could be. For $250, this is remarkably good value. You have over 3,000 pieces, a ton of brand new minifigures, and a really fun play feature, but I have to wonder, are previous fans of the Ninjago City modular buildings going to be drawn to this the same way they loved the other ones? I feel like this is our closest to a playset that we've gotten out of all of these, as opposed to the other ones which are absolutely more for display, and this is definitely something that people are going to have to wrap their heads around when buying this set. It is meant to be a big play feature to build up the mech. So much of the set is dedicated to these winches and arms and different places to store the mech armor, that if you're not a big mech person, then maybe this set isn't for you. But for me, I love mechs and I love the Ninjago City series, so this is basically the perfect set for me. But now it's time to dive deep into the minifigures included in the set, of which 11 in total are included. If you count Dorama's puppet as a minifigure, which honestly, given how articulated it is and how in scale it is with the rest of the figures, I totally count that as an actual character in the sets, and I'm actually gonna mount him on my minifigure wall as well. I've sort of arranged the minifigures in most exciting to least exciting, and obviously that's just my opinion, but I have a feeling that most people are going to agree on my order here, starting off with Casual Harumi. Now this minifigure is almost perfect. The torso printing is amazing. They resurrected the old mold for Harumi's hairpiece, even after presumably the mold was destroyed because the last time we saw the piece was in Lego Video, specifically for the character, and she even has a brand new print for the face, showcasing a calm face on one hand and a very angry face on the other, like when she's lunging out in anger against the ninja. I was honestly surprised to see she had a brand new face. I think they totally could have gotten away with using maybe a generic face for her, but I'm very happy they didn't, and it just makes the figure feel a lot more special. The main downside though is that unfortunately they did not have the budget to print her legs. The way that budget works when allotting different element pieces for certain themes is Lego designers have a certain amount of new elements that they can introduce per theme, whether it be new prints or new torso elements or new molds, and unfortunately they just didn't have the budget to print her legs the same way that they were printed in the show, which means that she is just using the plain bright green legs, which honestly just doesn't look quite right for the minifigure. It's especially obvious when you compare her alongside the other versions of Harumi that we've gotten over the years, where we literally got the Oni Mask of Hatred version of Harumi, which is just the stone version of this character in this outfit, which does include printed legs, which really shows that the legs were supposed to be printed, but sadly they didn't do it for the figure, and that is a bit disappointing. Otherwise though, the figure is basically perfect, and I am really happy to finally get her as an actual minifig. Our next character is Twitchy Tim, and this is a really interesting one. You see, we were supposed to get a Twitchy Tim minifigure back in the Island sub-theme in 2021, but due to production issues and supply chain issues, that set was cancelled. which means that LEGO literally had this minifigure just sitting in the pipeline for 4 years until they finally were able to include him in a city set. I'm glad to get him as an actual figure, especially because he was one of the more prominent characters from the island, and the other interesting thing is that the original design of the character in the show used a modified version of Jake Raines' vest from LEGO Pharaoh's Quest in 2011, and those details are still retained on this figure, right down to the Pharaoh's Quest team logo on the back of the jacket, as well as the different aviator vest icons on the front of the vest itself, which is just a really interesting detail they carried over. And it's really cool to add one more side character to my collection of Ninjago side characters, which you can see right here. Moving on to some of the other villains included in the set, first off we have Dorama. The funny thing about Dorama is that it was very clear from when he first appeared in the show he was never really supposed to be a standard minifigure. In fact, they reused the minifigure headprint for Gravis in the show to use for Dorama's character. But now, a couple of years after he first appeared in the show and they've gone ahead and made him into an actual minifigure, they couldn't even reuse that headpiece because it had an alternate expression on the back, which would have been showcased by the hat. Now, Dorama as a minifigure is okay. I feel like a big part of his character in the show is the fact that his robes kind of have this sparkle look to them, and they totally could have pulled it off by adding in metallic bits and pieces of color scheme into his outfit, so I do feel like that is a bit of a miss in my opinion, but overall it is about as good as they could have done without having the sparkle aspect. We also have Dorama's puppet as an actual articulatable figure, and while it is scaled down by a ton compared to what it looks like in the show, it's not that bad. I actually think this is one of the most fun figures to play around with and pose, allowing you to swing the sword back and forth. You can tilt the legs as well, and even the head moves side to side and back and forth, which is one of my favorite parts of the figure. It's super simple, but the fact that you can tilt the head back and forth adds so much character to the build, and I just love the fact that they were able to make this so articulatable and fun to pose, even as just a smaller scale character. It's a lot smaller than his actual appearance, but I think as an actual LEGO item, it totally works in minifigure scale, and I'm really happy with the way they pulled this one off. So much so that I totally count him as an official Ninjago minifigure, and have included him on my minifigure wall. Moving on from that, we have another member of Imperium, and that is Dr. LaRoe, another one of those side characters I never really thought we would get as a minifigure. Dr. LaRoe is just using these standard unprinted gray legs, which isn't that interesting, but I do love the printing on the torso. It's replicated the Imperium lab coat pretty much one-to-one from what it appears like in the show to actually having a physical minifigure, and she has those trademark green glasses as well as an angry expression on the back of the face. Given that LaRoe was a pretty prominent side antagonist of Dragons Rising Season 1 in 2023, it's really cool to finally get her as a minifigure, and I'm really curious if that means they'll be going back through other seasons of Dragons Rising and continuing to give us figures. I'm still holding out hope on a Frohiki or a Frack or a Gandalaria, and so many of the other amazing side characters like Bonzel need minifigures, so hopefully maybe this time next year they might be appearing in sets. Next up, we have the new version of Pixel, which we saw in the January wave of Ninjago sets. We've already taken a very close look at this in my January minifigure overview, so no need to dwell on this one too much. I think it's really nice to get Pixel as a minifigure back once again, since we haven't really seen her since Ninjago Core, and it is a really cool version of the character. Sporting a special printed mask, she has some fans on the back showcasing her mechanical nature, and the really nice Samurai X logo, but again, it's not a new minifigure for the set, so there's not really much else to say here. Another minifigure that is technically new for the set, but is one that we saw in the January wave, is this shirtless version of Zane, showcasing his mechanical components. The only difference from his appearance in this outfit from the January wave is that he is using the smiling Detective Zane faceprint, as opposed to the other angry faceprint which they used for the other version of him in the $10 mech set, which was showcasing his standard angry face expression. It's cool to see him just in another outfit, although I guess that does make it a bit redundant with the $10 set on my minifigure wall. Moving on to our next unique character in the set, this is the Dragonian Tourist. We have no idea as of right now what the Dragonians are going to be like in the show, but this is a decidedly more friendly version of the villain faction which we've been seeing at the first half of this year. It's using the standard Dragonian scout headpiece and mohawk, but just putting him in casual outfits, which is a pretty funny design, and one that I think is maybe not going to be canon to the show, but is just a nice little addition which we can showcase for the minifigures here. Moving on from that, we have a set of 3 different Ninjago City civilians, and unfortunately these ones are probably my least favorite figures of the set. They are just using regular pieced together LEGO City standard minifigures when putting them together, whereas some of the other civilians we've gotten for the Ninjago City sets have used more Oriental and Asian inspired designs. These are just regular city figures. I guess this one is nice because it does have that new dual molded piece which we've only seen in like the Jaws set and Cooper from LEGO Dreams, so that's nice, but it's nothing really special. As opposed to some of these other figures here, which are really uninteresting, just using the standard LEGO Jurassic World t-shirt, which is still in use for that figure there, and then we have a construction worker which looks like it could have just came straight from LEGO City. Altogether, these civilian figures are not the most interesting. I get that we have to have them for a Ninjago City set, but I definitely would have loved to see some additional characters using some of these parts. When you compare these to the other Ninjago civilian figures which I have on my wall, the difference is really night and day, where you can see that back for the other city sets, they put a lot more effort into these civilians than they did for these. But with that, we have summed up our look at all of the brand new LEGO minifigures for Ninjago City Workshops. Let me know in the comments, what do you think of this set? It's definitely one of the most unique ones. I'm sure that it's again going to be pretty controversial, and I'm really curious to hear what folks think about this when images release online. When I first saw the set, I kind of had a very confused reaction. I was really excited to see Harumi, and then I was trying to like understand what the set was, and I was kind of confused by the box art as to what it was, and then after building it, I completely came around on the set, and now it's one of my favorites. I like it a lot better than Doc's, and I might like it about as much as I like Markets, which is saying a lot. And overall, I'm just really happy the Ninjago Modular Building space is allowing for something a little bit cheaper and more fun to be placed into the lineup. Because of the 15th anniversary of Ninjago next year, I wouldn't be surprised if they have like the biggest Ninjago City set ever in the works, and that is probably going to be the most expensive Ninjago set ever as well. So it's really cool to get a bit of a stepping stone in between the next year's set and the one that we got previously that is just a smaller modular building. It's certainly unique, it's not going to be everyone's favorite, but I love how they're swinging for the fences here and doing a unique concept as a modular building for Ninjago, and it is hard to beat $250 for this, given the amount of pieces, the minifigures, the amount of detail. It's a phenomenal set. That's all for now. Thank you so much for tuning into Duck Breaks, and be sure to like and subscribe for even more LEGO news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon. Thank you so much, and bye for now.